Greetings, Kerbonauts! North Star here with another episode of The Lost Art of Heavy Lift Vehicles. Tonight, I'll be talking about staging. Next week, we'll finish up staging and begin talking about ascent profiles. Staging is a topic everybody has some familiarity with, but let's start off by introducing some simple terms. There are two basic types of staging every player should be familiar with. The first is serial staging. This is when two stages fire one after another, as the upper stage after a lower stage in a two-stage rocket. The second is parallel staging, when two stages fire at the same time but burn out at different times, as when side-mounted solid rocket boosters in the main engine of a launch stage. As with, generally speaking, the more stages you can pack into a rocket, the better your delta V and payload fraction will be. Additionally, parallel staging is generally superior to serial staging, as it allows engine mass from the later stages to be productively utilized to accelerate the rocket rather than sitting idle during the burn time of the lower stages. Larger rockets with heavier payloads are unique in that they can efficiently be comprised of a larger number of stages than a smaller rocket. This is quite simply because staging equipment such as the couplers have mass in themselves, and rocket engines can only be reduced so far in size before they start suffering from higher costs and/or inferior performance due to miniaturization. Compare the funds to thrust and thrust to weight ratios of the Ant rocket motor and the LVT-30 Reliant rocket motor, for instance. As a rule, parallel stages are side-mounted, whereas serial stages are vertically stacked. Each stage needs to be able to lift the one above it, so the diameter will become progressively larger as you move down a rocket. However, there is one important exception to this rule: radial boosters. Engines like the Spark side-mounted thruster allow you to have only the engine extend out from the rocket, while the fuel tanks are stacked vertically, allowing a longer, thinner, and more aerodynamic rocket design. Very large rockets also benefit from excellent ballistic coefficients, meaning they'll experience relatively little aerodynamic drag compared to their mass. This is due to the square-cube law, a topic I touched on last week during my full audio podcast, which you can find posted on YouTube, and I provided Biff with a link for if at some point you want to go back and review just that, while building your own heavy lift vehicle, for instance. The essence of it, though, is that the square-cube law says larger objects of the same shape are more aerodynamic as their volume scales more quickly than the surface and cross-sectional area. Therefore, when designing a large rocket, you have less reason to be concerned if a design choice leads to higher aerodynamic drag than with a smaller rocket. Gravity losses due to higher time to orbit are more of a concern than aerodynamic drag, and anything you can do to increase thrust-weight ratio and reduce ascent time will generally pay off from a delta V and payload fraction perspective. This means that radial engines and side-mounted boosters are more useful with larger rockets than smaller ones. They improve the thrust-to-weight ratio of a rocket versus serial staging. It can also be used to leverage the taller height of a larger rocket by burning some of the fuel from upper stages using radial engines. Finally, larger rockets are less subject to aerodynamic instability than smaller rockets. Because they can be designed in more of a pyramidal shape with more drag towards the bottom and have less surface area relative to their mass to begin with, it is easier to incorporate things like radial engines into a larger design without hopelessly destabilizing your rocket. Less is more when it comes to radial engines. The next time you design a very large rocket, I suggest adding a couple small radial engines to the second stage, allowing them to fire from liftoff. Balance this by placing a bit more fuel in the second stage, and be amazed by the substantial increase in payload capacity you will obtain relative to the small additional cost of the engines. Next week, I'll get to more complex subjects like drop tanks and reusable stages. After that, I'll begin discussing ascent profiles if there's time. Don't forget, you can find the audio versions of all my segments, including the first, on YouTube if you ever want to review anything. And don't hesitate to ask me questions if you come across me on Steam, where my username is Northstar1989. Until next time, this is Northstar, signing off. May you always reach your destination and find a star pointing true north to guide you home.